We chatted as I changed back into my trouser suit. I say chatted, more Rita explaining to me what it's like to work in a working museum, which isn't really work, it's more of an acting role, and explaining how things used to be done to groups of children mainly. You three did more work in 10 minutes than the cook has ever done. She admitted, it's just our way of giving children an idea of how easy life is these days in comparison to the olden days. Once I was back in my own clothes, Rita escorted me out to the kitchen where Mrs. Barnes was waiting for me. I've been trying to convince her to take a part-time job here. Really? Said Mrs. Barnes, glancing from me to Rita. Yes, replied Rita. We need all the help we can get, and Rebecca was not only comfortable wearing a traditional Victorian maid's uniform, but communicated extremely well with both the children and the teachers, I understand. Mrs. Barnes gave me complimentary smile. Yes, I noticed. She agreed. And I'm sure you'd like to get out of the house a bit more often. She added, turning to me. Oh yes, replied Rita. Rebecca mentioned she was being taught at home. Mrs. Barnes and Rita chatted for a few moments as I took a few photos of the kitchen now it was free of visitors. Before long, we said our goodbyes and headed back home. Rita seemed quite keen on you, said Mrs. Barnes. Would you like a part-time job? I stammered, it's not as simple as that. Why ever not? She asked. Well, for a start I'm grounded until next summer, I replied, and I'm sure Rita would change her mind once she found out my real name is Peter and not Rebecca. Mrs. Barnes thought for a moment. I knew she understood my point. Well, with regards to you being grounded, I'm sure your mother would be flexible, seeing as this is a good opportunity, learning and earning. I agreed with a silent nod. But that doesn't alter that fact that I'm a boy. Well, Rita did give me some information, so I'll mention it to your mother. She said. I'm sure we can work around the other stuff. She added. As we drove home, I wondered what it would be like to actually work at the museum. It would be good to get out of the house more often, but then again, having to wear all those undergarments and a corset every Sunday was far from ideal. Still, all in all, the day was most enjoyable, and as far as I can tell, not a soul guessed my real gender. Eventually we pulled into our driveway and entered the house. Did you have a good time? Mother asked as we entered the study. Yes, thanks, I replied as I routed in my handbag for Mother's camera. We got plenty of photos. Rebecca even ended up wearing a traditional Victorian kitchen maid's costume. Mrs. Barnes gushed. And she looked excellent. Really? Mother replied, obviously surprised. Did you get a photo? Oh yes, plenty, Mrs. Barnes replied. She and two younger girls donned the traditional dress and helped the cook in the kitchen. And Rebecca also explained to a group of school children and their teacher what it was like to wear a Victorian dress and all the layers of undergarments. And a corset, I added. A corset? Mother asked. Yes, 3 of us were chosen to help the cook, which involved wearing the full traditional dress. Then later a teacher asked me about the costume and her entire class gravitated towards me as I explained what Rita had told me about Victorian clothing. He was an absolute charm, gushed Mrs. Barnes. So much so, Rita wanted her to work there on the weekends.